Good morning. So I can't believe so many people get up this early. But every time I have to get up early, I don't go to sleep because I know I have to get up early. So I hate getting up early. And I'm really, really pleased to be able to speak to you today. And one reason is because I'm not speaking to myself. And what I mean by that is that I speak a lot to communications people. Whenever I speak to communication people, they're like, gosh, I wish our leaders could hear this. And it's almost impossible to get leaders together to talk about communication. So I have to admit I was really, really overwhelmed. And I understand I'm not supposed to say shocked, but shocked at how many people had signed up to come to the seminar this morning. And I looked at the list, and we had so many different kinds of leaders. We have a styreleder here, woof, so you never get those in the room, styreleder. We have an administrative director, we have a groupeleder, avdelingsleder, HR-leder, and advisors, we have consultants, we have the director of supply chain, who's in English, director of supply chain. We have a radiograph. Is he here this morning? The radiograph. I'm not sure if it's a he or a she. So we have a sectionschef, daglig leder, driftsansvarlig. I don't even know what that means actually. So driftsansvarlig. We have a fagdirektør. So a kreativ leder. Ledersalgs, we have leders, markedsføring, also infoleder. Is the person here who has the title informationsleder? You must change that immediately. So it's only the public sector that hangs on to that old title, informationsleder. And I think Inge Jan brought up the good point. Does communication make great leaders, or do you have to be a great leader to be? Good communicators are great leaders. Can you teach somebody to be a good communicator? So we're going to come back to that. And I think I've made some pretty strong promises in my description of what I was going to talk about, and I think we'll get into sort of most of that. My name is Peggy Brønn. I am American and am appalled at what's happening in the United States. So it's any Republicans in the room, out. But I'm also a leader for the Center for Corporate Communication here at BI. And my colleague Alex Buman has put out some magazines, our last magazine from June, for you all to take a look at. I think we're the only research center in Norway that concentrates or focuses on communication. And come back a little bit to what we're doing. But this is what sort of we put out today. So good communication and high performance go together. And what we mean by that is high performance organizations, high performance of employees, which leads to high performance of organization. And it is a responsibility of the leader to make sure good communication is a cornerstone of the organization. Okay. But we're going to get into what is communication. What is communication? And as Inge Jan also said, we have plenty of examples of poor communication. And these are just some things from the media. If you read the media, innholdsmessig har ledelsen och kommunikation utvecklat sig till ett Babelstorn. So what are we talking about? The word is used all the time. So I think the one on which far right, spokespeople for organizations have no credibility whatsoever. Well, some, depending on who they are, personally. But trust in organizations is pretty low. Trust in the leaders of organizations is pretty low. And it's what other people say about you that has more credibility than what you say about yourself. Right? So it's a huge challenge First of all, trust is, sort of a good in our society that's going down, down, down for many, many reasons. So it's, this is an exchange I overheard at some point in time. So it's somebody speaking to a leader, you understand it, but we don't, okay? That's not my problem. I know what I'm talking about. You go figure it out yourself, right? But that's not what we're telling people. I don't care. I'm in charge, and I can decide. So something happens to people when they get authority. I feel the same way. So you're given power. You're given authority. It's an indication that you're doing something well, probably, that you're being promoted, and you're put into a leadership position. And I think we can all agree that there's a lot of people in leadership positions that shouldn't be there for various reasons, but they are there. They are there. So and communication is the top skills that employers are looking for. And these are relatively recent statistics. So, the ability to work in a team structure and to make decisions, those are tied for first place. But working in a team is all about being able to communicate. All right, so it's you can't work in a team and be a right ass, So it's really have a good team atmosphere. But the ability to communicate verbally with people inside and outside the organization. There's a definition of public relations that the PR department is in charge of building relationships with stakeholders. Well, that's not true. All right? Your communication staff has nothing to do with your investors, probably your customers, your employees so much on a day-to-day basis, your suppliers, etc. Everybody in the organization is making those contacts and building relationships. So it's, and if you look at, MBA students, business students especially, employers are wanting communication skills. And there's a difference between skills and empathy in a way, so we're going to come back to that. So it's, I don't think, without a doubt, it's something that we need to be doing. So after being in the BI system for many, many, many years, and understanding this sort of position and having worked with, Peter Lederens and, and working with strategy and stuff like that, it kind of dawned on me that in different disciplines, they do things and then they don't take it the next step. For strategy, for example, we need to create a strategy. Okay. What about everybody that's impacted by that strategy? They never take, sort of the next step and say, now we need to communicate the strategy and get everybody on board. And this is being taught, and this is in the strategy books, etc. So after working with Peter Lederens and all these years at BI, I said, why aren't business students who are being taught management, being taught communication as well? And if you go around the country, and I think we know that most of the leaders in organizations come from NTNU or NHH or BI. Would that be correct? In a general, statement? None of them have communication. So at BI, we finally got a course, thanks to one person, the dean of the program, Economy and Administration, Doug Tonge. So it's after hearing me for years and years and years, and going to some meetings with the government who overview our education criteria, this is what the government is starting to look at. They want ethics and communication in business education. So he came to me and we put together a course called Communication for Ledere og Organisationer. And it was a struggle. I have to tell you, it was a real struggle. Because students who were studying econometrics, etc., wondered why they were studying communication. What's that got to do with what I'm going to be doing? right? So it was quite frustrating, and so it's it's sort of communication is just something that happens, and it's not prioritized as part of their education. So we are very, very pleased that BI really is the first business school in Norway, if not the only one, that has communication as part of a business education for that bachelor's degree. So it's we have a little bit of ways to go. So it's so just sort of summarize in that regard. It is recognized as important. Okay, but we give it a little attention. Everyone thinks they can do it. Okay, we're communicating, but there's communication scholars such as myself. So think that communication is the result. We should all communicate, and leaders see it as a means to an end. If we're good communicators, then we're going to do better financially, and it's both true, right? So but we have to come together. We have to come together. So in the book, if you look at the book, the sort of the structure of it and where we were going was basically, what is organization communication? All right, so let's define it, first of all, and what are the different functions of communication within the organization, and then look at leadership and management communication, and primarily in teams. And I was working with organizational psychologists, which I had never done before. So it was an opportunity to reach across disciplines in this case. And you have to understand psychology because you have to understand human beings, because that's what we're dealing with here, human beings, right? So you have to understand how they think. And we're very normative. I'm a very normative person. And what that means is I tell you what to do, but I don't tell you how to do it. All right? So I have people coming to me, I say, I don't do tactics. I don't do tactics. If you want tactics, you got to go to somebody else. All right? I can tell you what you should do, but how you do it, that's not what I do. So it's, and then we have, ethics and communication always at the end of the book, right? So it's like, you got to move that up. It looks like an add-on, which is, sending a bad message. But then we have, interpersonal communication, group communication, conflict, how to deal with conflict, intercultural communication. This is a big, big changing world in Norway, interculturally. Here I am speaking English to you. And crisis and crisis communication. We normally see crisis in the newspaper. That's what we read. And how leaders handle those crises is the crisis, right? So it's so if you look at the differences in the sub-disciplines of communication, so getting leaders who have no communication education or background, understanding what is the difference between all this kind of stuff. Because, you have something called business communication. And business communication is more or less teaching you how to do PowerPoint presentations, teaching you how to do a speech, teaching you how to write a letter to your employee, these sorts of things. But it really doesn't get into your head, right? Sort of this feeling of if you're communicating or not. It doesn't teach you how to read people's faces so that when you're having a conversation, you go like, maybe I need to change the subject, all right, or stop yelling or whatever, okay? So it doesn't really get into that sort of stuff. Corporate communication. This, you might call public relations, but it has to do with helping the organization communicate, often through, public relations, these different sorts of things, corporate advertising, your social responsibility may be there in conjunction with other divisions within your organization. And corporate communication is trying to make a more integrated approach where you also have marketing and your public relations people working together on behalf of the organization communicating. Then you have management communication. It's leaders communicating with employees and other people outside the organization. Organizational communication is a lot of organizational theory, looking at the structure of organizations and what kind of different organizations communicate in different ways. Because not all models fit all organizations. right? So it's because we have all kinds of different organizations out there that have different demands. So organizational communication is a wonderful field to study. So it's but I think George Bernard Shaw sort of said it correctly. So we think we're communicating. We leave a conversation, go like, okay, they understood what I was saying. And then, what happened? All right? So we think we've delivered a message, we think people understand, and actually it hasn't occurred. So so I thought we sort of define what is communication. So we're sort of on the same page. What are we talking about when we talk about communication? And it comes from the Latin, so to make common. Okay? So I'm not real fond of the definition that says conveying information. There's a lot of organizational theorists that are still stuck in if they only had enough information to do their job, they'll be happy, right? That's what they need. They need information to do their jobs. That's still in practice, very much a model that's in practice today. So it is, but then they have the exchange of information between two or a group of people. But we're still not really getting at the heart of what it's all about. And the idea of making common, and that basically means that we agree or we understand each other. You actually understand what it is I'm saying, right? And then how do I know you're understanding what I'm saying? Right? Do you just go like, yeah, okay. Am I, are my antennas such that I can actually look at you and go like, he didn't understand a word I said. Okay. So it's, and I have this challenge when I'm lecturing in class, when I have a big, class and a lot of international students, I see them I'm losing them because they've turned off their translator. Because I do that myself. I turn off my translator, So I'm like, whoops, what happened there? So it's a systemic process, okay? And people interacting through symbols, right? So to create interpret meanings. And this is where it gets kind of tricky, okay? Because it's a process, communication doesn't stop. Just because I'm talking to you and you're not talking, that doesn't mean you're not communicating with me, right? So let's say, if I was just to stand here dead still and not say a word, I would still be communicating with you, right? On a whole bunch of different levels, right? So it's, how I dress is sending a message to you, right? My hair, my glasses, my everything, okay? So, and the same with you, right? I see you sitting there, and I'm picking up all kinds of messages from you guys. But how I am interpreting them is another thing, okay? So you have this idea of symbols, and symbols mean different things to different people. What I may find fun, you may find offensive, for example. All right, so it's, you can be sort of aware of those things. Here's some quotes from Linda Lai, my, sort of professors at BI. So, a leader that uses motivating words can, uppnå stora gevinster. All right. So what's a motivating word for you? What's a motivating word for me? All right. So you have to be aware of these things. So it's Jan Kettel Arnulf. So it change people's behavior, right? The way we want them to go. Right? The way we want them to go. We want our employees to do something. So we use communication, to help them, to get them going in that direction. So here we have, sort of this sort of shared reality. So we look at the same picture and we see different things. All right? I may see a table and you see two people looking at each other. And how can we communicate if that's what's happening? All right? So it's and if you're doing with strategy with organizations, you're doing change within organizations, you think it's a great thing, not so much maybe, the employees. And what's change? I'm a firm believer that small changes are a crisis for the person it's happening to, right? It may not be such a crisis for you. Asking somebody, I remember many years ago, somebody was asked to move their office and they'd had an office with a window for years. And all of a sudden, a new employee came in who had higher status. This person was asked to move their office so the new employee with higher status could have it. That created a real crisis for that individual. And management was totally unaware of what they had done. Right? It's kind of brutal in a way, but it was one person. And they wanted to make one person happy and made another person unhappy. Could that have been handled in a different way? Because what did that person who was unhappy do? They were saying not nice things about that organization. You don't want that, right? You don't want that. Because people believe employees. They don't believe leaders, but they believe employees. They trust people like themselves, right? So if your employees say something, they're the ones that know what's going on. Now, this is nuts, all right? So I got a paper to review, and I'm reading this paper. This is, I think it's a guy. You know, I never know who the author is, but it wrote like a guy. And and this person was trying to demonstrate how reputation creates value, or inputs in creating value for an organization. And this is called the value-based management, which I thought was actually like values. You know, managing based on your values. No. It's like everything that happens in an organization should add value, financial value, to an organization. But I started looking at this and I went, holy moly, you know, this is really a good illustration, because what this person did, and they did it themselves, I think, they went all the way out to the value creation part of the organization, all the way up to the person's counting up the value of the organization. So they sort of took this, you know, I can't even see it, Jesus, you know, so what is it? So, you know, EBIT, earnings before interest and taxes, and there's something called NOPAT. You financial people, what's NOPAT? I don't even know what that is. So it's so they broke it down, and if you go all the way back, now you're getting into, you have customer satisfaction. What are the value creators that go into customer satisfaction? All these things cost money. All these things cost money. And then it dawned on me, I'm like, wow, this is really a great illustration of how difficult it is for people to talk to each other within organizations. Because you have the value creation going on way over or down there, and then you have the value counting up going on way the hell up there. And those people don't even talk to each other. Right? Right? And we're really bad here because that's the way we teach. Right? We teach marketing here, finance over there, and we never talk to each other. I can't remember the last time I talked to a finance person. So Maria is our finance liaison. You know, she's always over there talking to Ivan Buren. You know, so I have no reason to go over and talk to a finance professor. But what are they doing when it comes to building reputation and communication, right? So it's, and I have a bunch of them in my reputation class, in the master's. I'm like, wow, this is too cool. All right? So I go in with my own prejudice. What are you number people doing in this class? Why are you taking this class? A little suspicious, you know. Like, you think it's an easy A? Right? So, no, they wanted to do something different. Okay? And my whole thing is getting them to understand what they're doing is really, really important for building reputation for the organization. So if you had this long chain, I was just like, wow. You know, this explains why it's so confusing. So in preparation for today, I went back and looked at some presentations. And I looked at Ivan Martinson, who had a presentation right before summer. Did any of you come to Ivan's presentation? And I tried to translate it while I'm listening to it. You know, so it's, but he said, you know, management is foremost about påvirkning, influencing, getting people to do things, right? So it's influencing employees who are creating the results for the organization, the value creation. But there's a lot of, and he came up with a really interesting sort of organizational theory, which I'm going to talk about. But if you go back and you look at all of the theories, you know, sort of organization or management theory, they all have communication implications. So if you look at your organization, you see how you're running your organization. Okay, so it's scientific management. It's really about, it's a tool. Communication is a tool, is controlled by management, etc. That mindset still exists today. So human behavior, relationships and change focus. Putting the more employees in the center. Good communication and high performance go together. And you can see the characteristics of these different management theory types, and see how your organization fits into it and how your communication. And you have what you call these integrated perspective. Now they're getting into the external audience. Okay, not just internal, but externally it's important. And then there's postmodern, critical, and feminist perspectives, right? So and basically what that is saying is we have hierarchy in organizations, and why should we at the bottom have to listen to you and the top? Can we have a little bit more democratic processes? And of course all of these things don't work in all organizations, but I really like what Ivan was talking about, and this idea of these, what is it that motivates people? And the one thing was sort of this empowerment, what he called psychological empowerment, okay? Giving people autonomy, it gives them meaning to their work, okay? It makes them feel that, that they have value and that they're competent, which has an impact on job satisfaction and effectiveness, okay? So but this requires what he calls empowering leadership, okay? So can you actually do this yourself? And he described what empowering leadership was. So it's, you give your employees, he calls it myndiggjøring, myndiggjøring, right? So it's by delegating, by, you become the coordinator, and then you encourage them. You encourage your employees, you listen. So it's, I'm not good at that, I have to tell you. I'm the kind of person that knows exactly what you're going to say, so I cut you off, right? So, but I'm aware I do that. So when I find myself getting ready to do it, I go like, okay. So it's, or I say, I can't remember things. I have an idea in my head, and if you keep talking, I will forget it. So can I just say it, right? So there's a little, you can get away with that at a certain age, So but you focus on strengths of people, and you give them a lot of support, right? So and you teach them how to do it themselves. You help your employees be autonomous. And we know that people like working that way, and Ivan has shown that it has enormous benefits, to organizations. But even if you go back and you look at, the different managerial roles, almost all of Mintzberg's descriptions have communication, liaisoning. That means, sort of reaching out, monitoring, you're a disseminator, you're a spokesperson. How many of you have had a course or been to media training, for example? Yeah. So I recommend it highly. Never stick your leader in front of a camera if they haven't been to media training, okay? So it's, you really want to exacerbate a crisis, that'll do it, all right? So all of these things, the motivator, the liaison, the stimulator, the negotiator, the spokesperson, they all take communication capabilities. And if you can't do this, then you're not fulfilling your role, very well as a leader. So today, communication is about we. The organization is we, right? How can we make this happen? Not me, not mine. So it's how can we work through a conflict? And it's pulling all this together. It's a big job for leaders, and I think that. So you have, what happens when you don't do these things, when you take the approach of telling, right? So I think all of us have experienced at some point in our careers or our job lives that, organizations make strategy, change the rules or whatever, and then tell us. Okay? And what that happens is people react negatively to it. And then you end up with some people who they call hooligans. Okay? I can say that I'm pretty much a hooligan. All right, so it's because it's a sort of a visceral reaction. Don't tell me what to do when it impacts me. Why am I finding out about it now? How come I wasn't consulted? All right, so it's it's so easy to avoid that kind of reaction. So then you have selling to the many that has been decided by the few. Okay, we're going to have an allmøte. And at the allmøte, we're going to let you know what our new strategy is, okay? And that creates, compliant collaborators. There's many years ago, somebody told me that a lot of leaders think an allmøte is face-to-face communication, right? So, no. And that people will not ask questions at an allmøte, because you got to be pretty damn brave to stick your hand up and ask a critical question in front of a couple hundred people, right? So it's particularly in an employee or in a company situation. So it's and then you have this sort of doing it the right way, if you will. Okay, driving accountability down by bringing more people into the process, and then the result is you have people who are willing to collaborate. And then lastly, so this sort of co-creation. But then you have to sort of know who's doing what, who's likely to support you, who has, good standing among employees that can help you. And often these people are people with informal power within your organization. We were discussing, at our institute meeting, they have a lot of people standing outside our offices talking. So somebody said, well, we should just work with our doors closed. I don't want to work with my door closed. I don't like working with my door closed. Well, we have to just tell people not to talk. No, the last thing you should do is stop people from talking in the corridor. That's where people talk about stuff, right? That's where you see who people are listening to that are not part of the formal structure. And those people have power. We call them communication stars, right? So, and then, each of these approaches may be appropriate at different times. So you're going to get copies of this presentation. So, and this is part of it. So it's sometimes you need to be directive. Sometimes you can't involve everybody in the decision, etc. So, but knowing when it is appropriate to do that. So I found this lovely little article at Harvard Business Review. Leadership is a conversation. Leadership is a conversation. So and this is a horrible, so I apologize for it. But you'll get a copy of this. So basically what he said, this is sort of the old way of doing things. And he calls it corporate communication. It's not corporate communication. So here's an article about communication that's using wrong terminology. These are not communication people. All right? There are other disciplines writing about communication, which I love. So it's, but they have some really good points in here. Okay, the new model of organizational communication, and you have these concepts: intimacy, okay, interactivity, inclusion, intentionality. Okay, how leaders convey strategy. How they include people. All right. So, and these are words that are hard for us sometimes as individuals to deal with. All right, so particularly the word intimacy. So it's a kind of creepy word on the job. So it's so communication is all about the process that helps us with the relationships. Individual, group, internal, external, etc. Because we have to realize, we have to keep in mind always that organizations are made up of human beings. I was lecturing in class the other day about reputation, and we're talking about, Apple does this, and, so-and-so company does that. I'm just like, yeah, but who's doing it? Well, Apple. Yeah, but Apple is like a company, a thing. Somebody in Apple is doing that. right? So if Apple made a mistake, somebody made a mistake, not this entity, this glass of water or whatever, there was a person in that glass of water that made a mistake. All right? So, but we our brains BI. What is BI? BI is all of us, right? So this is all people. So the unit of analysis are human beings. So this is a wonderful little article. It was written several years ago, and I still think it's true. Okay, so the chief executive is the communication champion. Unfortunately, that when it comes to, I'll come back to it. So this is an unfortunate circumstance here, because often the chief executive is not a good communicator. I have seen, in more than 20 years of working in communication and public relations in Norway, I have seen the promotion and the demotion of the communication department depending on who's sitting in the top seat. Okay? It is the administrative director's, perception of the value of communication that determines the value of communication in an organization. And that is not right. That is not right. Okay, so it's it's just not. How can one individual have so much power? I just find that amazing. So there must be a match between words and actions. Obviously, consistency is key. So there must be a commitment to two-way communication. What is that? What do we mean when we say two-way communication? That means I talk, you listen, you talk, I listen. Is there communication going on there? Not necessarily. All right. So so shared responsibility, emphasis on face-to-face. How many companies in here have the new Facebook like internal communication platform? Is that working out? Okay, so it's face-to-face. It will never replace face-to-face. People like to see it. I do not let my students work with their computers open. I want to see their little faces, okay? I want to see their eyeballs, and they're looking at me, So it's, and I want to be able to see how they're accepting what I'm saying. If it's going in, or if they're tired, let's take a break, that kind of stuff, okay? And good news, bad news. Employees know they know what's going on. Everything's not rosy, right? Everything's not happy. There can be bad things going on. Be honest. Talk about it. Get it out. Okay? And really knowing who your stakeholders are, okay? And having a strategy for employee communications. This is really an undiscovered area or an under-researched area in Norway. Doing communication audits inside the organization. Who's reading what and how do they like it? Is this what they want as part of their communication? Okay? Do they want to get rid of the company newsletter that they can take home and read on the train, or does everything have to be electronic? Ask them, what they want. So so communication, or a lack of it, can be a real detriment to the health of an organization. Okay? So these are statements from, Bernard. I love Bernard. So the structure, extensiveness, and scope of the organization are almost entirely determined by communication techniques. So even if you have the most hierarchical organization, most top-down communication, we can go in and we can analyze that. And we can tell you precisely what kind of communication is going on or not going on. Okay? So I'm not going to read all of those. So the leader's responsibility, the leader is 100% responsible. Okay? So it's always, you think one of the first quotes I showed you was that people leave their jobs because their leaders are poor communicators. But it's the organization's responsibility to make sure that their leaders can do that. But they're not assessed on their communication capabilities. I think Volvo was one of the very few companies that started doing that. Okay, so being a communicative organization can give you competitive advantage. Being known as a good communicator. Okay? This is what we were talking about, leader styles influence outcomes. Here you got, hopp in the glass, okay, and then you got these two jokers. Yeah. So and people love Trump. Han snakker for lever. He says what he means. because people were so tired of politicians, not saying what they mean, or talking political stuff, right? Being populist. So it's and now look what it's got us into, Yoosh. So we know that leaders find communication important. Okay? They find having communication skills more important than communication people do. All right? This is what's so kind of bizarre, right? So leaders believe communication skills are very important for an organization's success. They don't necessarily know how to do it, but they want to be able to do it, okay? But what's really interesting is that they don't believe their corporate communication efforts contribute necessarily to their success. But there is a significant difference between those who have communication departments and those who don't. So those who have communication departments are more likely to find communication, sort of that it contributes to the success of the organization. And most organizations in Norway do not have communication departments. It feels like they do because we're sitting here in Oslo. But I think if you look at the research I've done, it was I was depressed because I got so little data back from leaders. And this is asking leaders, this research here, because they just didn't have communication departments because they're so small. I think 80% of companies or more have mindre enn 20 årsverk. And that's typical of, I think, most countries in the world. Okay? So so who do you go to? Then who do you go to? Right? You go to agency, you go to your own communication department, all right? So your communication department, one of their roles in contributing to your success is advising you. You have people in your communication department who can advise you. If you have a communication department that's dominated by social media people, you need to maybe take a look and see if you have anybody in there with maybe a little psychology combined with communication education. Right? So it's consulting and advising. This is what they should be helping you do. They should be helping your organization become a communicative organization. Right? So there's lots of books out there. These two books on the left were written by Kevin Murray, who used to be the head of communications for British Airways in the UK. And he sat through a lot of bad stuff, so he got a real inblick into bad leaders. So language for leaders, right? Communicate to inspire. These are how-to books you can pick up. We call them airport books, right? So it's, and great communication secrets of great leaders. Winston Churchill, right? So Marshall, the guy, the Marshall Plan. So how do they say? And you can even take courses, you can go to classes, you can do all kinds of stuff. Right? So to learn how to communicate. So it's because it's still important. It's still important. And this is from, sort of recently, again, Forbes. Okay? I like the last one. It's become fashionable to say that our present epoch is an information age, but that's not quite right. In truth, we live in a communication age, and it's time we started taking it seriously. That's a really, really nice quote. We love it as communication people, right, Alex? We love it. So, Maria. But Kete, he believes that ledelse en egen form for communication, og det kan læres. I'm not so certain I agree with that, okay? Because if you look at these books, we can teach you tricks. I can't, because I don't know how to, So I know what you should be doing. So, but can you teach people to listen if they don't know how to already? All right? Can you teach somebody to be empathetic? We know that, for example, men and women's brains are wired differently, and that women are better at reading facial expressions. That's just a fact. It's a physiological fact. Can we teach men how to read facial expressions? Okay. When somebody's crying, it's time to give them a little empathy. So it's that's pretty obvious, I think. So, So, can you instill a mindset in someone only after they become a leader? So the argument is that this is one reason it needs to be in the school system. This is one reason, if you're in an education where you're likely to be a leader, that this kind of thinking is part of your education. So you realize that, you're in a position, and these students, these economy and administration, I said, I don't get it. I went and looked at the kind of jobs you people get. And you're all becoming consultants. And I really want to hire somebody who can crunch numbers like a son of a bitch, but they can't talk to anybody. I don't understand why you don't believe this is important for you. So it's, and then I started giving them the assignment in financial stuff. I go like, effective communication is a function of X plus 1 plus X plus 2 plus X plus 2. I said, okay, now do you understand it? But it's just fair enough. I moved a little closer to the way they think. So it's, it took me a year or two to do that, So it's, I have been accused of how can you teach communication when you can't even communicate yourself, So I have been accused of that, and I take it in, and then I go, right? So, but yeah. So it's so in conclusion, without communication, organizations cannot function. They do function, obviously. They cannot function well. Maybe they're not as successful as they could be. And you don't need to be in the private sector, right? So if you're in the public sector, this is true. You have outcomes that you need from people. You need to get people together. You want to be proud of where they work, etc. So, and management is responsible for the functioning of these organizations. So communication is a function of management. There's no doubt about it. Okay? And lastly, it's hard. It is hard. I'm not gonna lie to you. So it's, I'm dying to take Maria's course, Rhetoric for Leaders. How to present argumentations and stuff like that. So there's a whole thing out there. So it's so welcome and takk for meg. Så.